3DMark 03 was a program from FutureMark that measured the speed and performance of graphics cards, a benchmark program. In the spring of 2003, NVIDIA was accused of cheating. According to FutureMark, they had fiddled with the drivers to get better test values. The cheating must have happened so that the drivers contain program code that detects that it is a benchmark program that is running. The drivers then temporarily increase performance at the expense of image quality, resulting in higher test results. NVIDIA themselves considered themselves innocently accused. FutureMark had to patch the 3DMark to save the reputation. It was obvious that GPU and graphics card manufacturers were doing 3DMark optimization as different drivers performed better in 3DMark without improving anything else. NVIDIA GeForce FX 5900 Ultra dropped 24% with the patch, compared with a drop of less than 2% with ATI's Radeon 9800 Pro with the latest ATI drivers. The damage was still done. This led to the importance of synthetic tests being phased out and replaced with real game tests. Even real game tests can be manipulated, but it's called optimization. However, FutureMark survived until they were acquired by UL on October 31, 2014 and formally merged into the company on April 23, 2018. Benchmark programs are still used, but more as tools for overclocking rather than comparing new products. Since the development of graphics cards and integrated graphics, new functions have been added. Features like ray tracing, DLSS, and FSR. Since the price tag of graphics cards has gone up extremely, it is important to ensure that these functions work well. That's why the benchmark 3DMark Port Royal real-time ray tracing benchmark becomes useful. 3DMark Port Royal is the world's first real-time ray tracing benchmark for gamers. It shows you how well your PC handles ray tracing effects in real time. Use Port Royal to benchmark graphics cards that support Microsoft DirectX ray tracing. Real-time ray tracing promises to bring new levels of realism to in-game graphics. Port Royal uses DirectX ray tracing to enhance reflections, shadows, and other effects that are difficult to achieve with traditional rendering techniques. As well as benchmarking performance, 3DMark Port Royal is a realistic and practical example of what to expect from ray tracing in upcoming games. It will be ray tracing effects running in real time at reasonable frame rates. 3DMark Port Royal was developed with input from AMD, Intel, NVIDIA, and other leading technology companies. Quote, "We worked especially closely with Microsoft to create a first-class implementation of the DirectX ray tracing API. Port Royal will run on any graphics card with drivers that support DirectX ray tracing." Here we see the current records. Since the RTX 4090 doesn't support SLI, it can't compete with dual RTX 3090 Ti. Let's spend some more time with 3DMark 03 since I made some interesting comparisons between then and now. First we will install 3DMark 03. There is really no difference from before. I downloaded the setup file from guru3d.com and installed it as usually. I run the benchmark 4 times and got different results. The results only got worse. Overall it was a blast. But the CPU performance was really bad, worse than ever before. The troubleshooting is too complicated to go into here, but may have to do with motherboard temperature. The CPU test is not a purely CPU test and requires quite a lot of the CPU in combination with the graphics card. It will soon become clearer. Time for another test session. Sometimes I could see some glitches during the Wings of Fury. But really not bad. The other tests looked flawless. This test was almost as good as the previous one. But it was still a downward trend. Let's take a closer look in normal speed and with afterburner monitoring. You can skip ahead if you don't want to wait. Everything looks fine in these measurement points. But I had missed one measuring point, the motherboard temperature. After the last benchmark, I was in Specky and saw that the temperature was 60 to 70 degrees Celsius, which may have contributed to the bad CPU score and downward trend on the other tests. And maybe it peaked even higher. In normal cases, the motherboard temperature is called PCH temperature, it's the chipset temperature. In Afterburner I can't find it. The result in Battle of ProxyCon is really crazy. The test and graphic engine itself is the bottleneck since it never uses resources to 100%. Troll's Lair has always been a demanding part of the benchmark. As you can see, the FPS is jumping up and down. Water effects and rendering of water became increasingly common in the early 2000s. It's based of sines approximation. It was one of the more demanding operations for a GPU. Nowadays it's done without major problems. During the CPU test, neither the CPU or the GPU is bottlenecking. Since I was capturing in software at the same time, it seems to have been more stressful for the motherboard with data transferring. The ambient room temperature was also high. This shows lack of the benchmark. It really doesn't measure what it's supposed to do.
Here we can see it again. This is a really terrible test which was not mature enough. No one really thought much of it. They noticed they got some difference if they switched CPUs, but the test wasn't really fair and certainly not scalable. I remember sometimes sighing and thinking it felt strange. I also skipped the test even though I overclocked the CPU. This is actually as serious as Nvidia's cheating. Perhaps FutureMark turned the spotlight on Nvidia to save its own skin. Here we can see for a short moment the fill rate actually using the potential of the GPU. Once again, we can see the deficiency. One explanation could be that the test does not utilize RAM because the test is made for the Windows 98, ME, 2000 or XP operating system. Operating systems with a range of 512 MB to 4 GB of RAM. Pixel shader is a graphical function that calculates the effects of the pixel. Depending on the desired resolution, several million additional pixels may be required to shape and color an image at 60 frames per second or more. This requires increasing the capacity of the graphic card. Depending on the version of your graphic card or its compatibility with a certain version of DirectX, the games will be compatible or not with the PC. Ragdoll is the feature that, in a computer game, lets a character be influenced by actual physical laws. This enables the computer game characters to move in a more realistic way. It also gives the characters an infinite amount of possible motion patterns in contrast to animated motion. We can still see the same problem with bottleneck in the benchmark itself. The result is even lower than before. It would be more than awesome for 20 years ago, but now I can see the general drawback of not using RAM and VRAM. And then not using the CPU or GPU to the limit. Maybe someone has a patch for it? If I get a registration code, I can even try higher resolution up to 1920 by 1080, but it will probably still have bottlenecks. The first attempt without video capture is still the best. A huge difference probably caused by data transferring and heat issue with the chipset. I want to thank you for watching this video. I hope it was entertaining. Now some of my rigs from 2006, 2007, and 2023 with test results.